Hello, dear friends. Welcome to Israel Essential. We've been talking about Israel, its culture, its people, its technologies, and also its survival in the world and the relevance of Israel to the Bible. Well, today we have a very special guest, Pastor Steve Khoury, who is the president of Holy Land Missions, and it's a joy, Pastor Steve Khoury, to welcome you to this program. Thank you very much for taking time.
Thank you.
And
Thank you, Dr. Paul. Thank you.
Could you talk to us about coexistence? Here in Israel, we have the Arabs, we have the Jews, and we have people from different parts of the world living together.
You know, the positivity of this reality, Dr. Paul, is that we're always learning from each other. As Arab, I'm an Arab believer, Israeli, I'm also Palestinian, considered by those in Bethlehem in the region. So I have a mix of both cultures and both backgrounds, being a Jerusalemite born citizen. And growing up hearing, learning from Jewish folks in the street or in schools, or learning from Muslims and how they see things, how they perceive Christianity, it allows us to see others for who they could be rather than for who they are at that moment. What also does, it allows us to respect others, regardless of their differences. It allows us to see them as human beings who are on a journey of life to searching and to see yourself, to see myself as a part of that puzzle, their solution is a good thing, a good place to start. And it's a positive thing more than a negative thing, until or unless something within the culture that forces you to go against your own spiritual beliefs or convictions, then that becomes a different topic. But I would say being in Jerusalem, the holiest city in the world, given that folks here are an approach on a journey to a creator, on a journey to a higher being, us as Christians in the community, directed people to the peace, love, joy, forgiveness, and grace. It's joyful, especially in the place where Jesus walked. What better place to do that?
Well, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, what do you think is happening now, and how do the people here manage it?
That's a good question, Dr. Paul. I am temporarily optimistic. What do I say temporarily? Because those of us who was born here or live here, we know there's always that roller coaster of a journey in this country. There's always a time of peace, calmness, and then hopelessness, and then goes back to war and calmness. And so, but I am optimistic because this young generation coming up right now, the 15, 16, all the way up till 20, 25, in early 30s, they grew up in the second intifada. I grew up in the first intifada, in the first early days. So this coming up, they're seeing it for what it is. They saw that it hasn't done much for them. In most cases, it has gotten things to become worse than what they could have been. So I see them reaching out to new options of hope. This younger generation talking about what they're asking questions, what the Jewish people feel about us, how do they feel, how do they believe, whether it be political based, faith based, spiritual based, they're hungry, they're searching. I'm optimistic, and I encourage every person around the world to come to walk where Jesus walked, to study the history 4,000 years ago, the Jewish history, to 2,000 years ago, the Christian history, down the line till today.
Well, the young people, as you rightly said, have to base their identity on something, whether it's culture or whether it's going to be faith. What do you think is happening?
I think the young generation, in my opinion, I have the honor to speak to about 30 to 40 college groups who come to Israel a year. Some of them are Ivy League schools, Harvard, and so forth. And in my journey is they're talking less and hearing more. They want to listen. I think the internet has confused them more than it has done them good. And they want people on the ground. So they're looking for people that have credibility and integrity. That we're talking a message of love, forgiveness, and grace, not from a nice Western country or nice Western estate. We're speaking love, forgiveness, and grace in the place where it is very difficult, very hard to do so. So this young generation, they're looking up for people that they can be inspired by, who have integrity, who have love and forgiveness, who live out the message rather than talking about it. And that's my answer to it. I'm very optimistic, and I'm optimistic for every generation around the world, because we know our God is a loving God, and we know He's a God of grace and forgiveness, but He's a God also that gives opportunity to every generation to know the truth of who He is and who He could be for every generation.
Well, the matter of faith, you're a pastor and you bring the gospel. So do you think it's different being a pastor, a minister among the Israelis, and there's a difference or a sort of a different perspective for the Palestinians to accept the gospel, because the Bible talks about Israel and the Palestinians in terms of culture have a different perspective. How do you manage both?
You know, it's very interesting because we have 13 ministries. Our ministry is called Holy Land Missions, and we minister mostly amongst the Arab communities. What little we do amongst the Jewish communities is we are invited in by synagogues and Jewish Orthodox movements. They invite us in to talk, why do we as Arabs, ministries leaders, love the Jewish people, and why are we teaching the Palestinians to love the Jewish people? It's a non-political basis. It's away from politics. It's a context. It's a biblical love. That the God of Israel is the God of Christianity. Our faith comes from a Judaic Christian root foundation. So ministering amongst the community, I go back to Acts 2, where the believers begin to speak in tongues, and there was other people, other nations were watching. So Jerusalem is a watching city. Everybody around Jerusalem, they watch. Internally, they watch. Externally, they watch. Ezekiel, Zechariah talks about the worlds, will tremble at the name of Israel, the name of God of Israel, and it will become. I'll make a cup of trembling amongst all nations. The world will drool over this land. So the Palestinian-Israeli culture, it's interesting because it's a bubble with its own, and the only way to experience it is you have to live here, which is difficult for most people around the world. But for me, I see people for who they could be, rather than that moment.
So
that's
the gospel doesn't separate the Arabs and the Israelites.
I think the approach to some of them are the same, are different, but I would say across the board is identical, because with Muslims, you're not going against their intellect, you're going against their heritage, their family. It's an identity. Jewish people, with some you're debating their intellect, but the majority of them, you're going against their identity. It's their identity is more important than what their belief system is. And I think both are in common in that. So what we've learned and what we teach others, we have a program, we teach West English-speaking Christians how to share their faith with Muslims, and that's a very good approach to take, because again, we say it's relationship. That's the secret. You got relationships to get to that point.
Even among the Christians, when they read the Bible, say a Palestinian reads the Bible, is an Arab. And the Bible talks about Israel in the Old Testament and so on. And it talks about don't mix with others and so on. How do you deal with that kind of scripture?
It's a very good question, because even the context of not being unequally yoked within that same realm. And I think Paul talks about the context of going into a Gentile home. You have Acts 10, Cornelius, where Peter had that dream with God. 3 times God sends food in a live animals on a basket, says, get up and eat. And Peter says 3 times no. That shows you the stubbornness of Peter being a Jew. But at the end, the heart of Peter was that everybody that's not Jewish is forbidden, or everybody that's not Jewish is defiled or unclean. And of course, within this realm of Acts 10, what does God tell Cornelius? He said, what God calls clean, you have no right to call unclean. And what God is doing is showing Peter what mankind could be. And seeing people who they could be allows you to walk the journey without compromising the basic foundation of your faith. To get to a point where you see people where they could be. They might not accept all your belief system. At least they have you planted a seed in their heart enough to a point where the Bible says, "My word never returns void." It doesn't say, "My belief never returns void." It says, "My word," means what you plant never comes back void.
So, love, the gospel which produces that love, the sacrifice of Christ which produces that love, unites the Arab and the Israeli.
It does. And sometimes they can't understand it. Sometimes they can't put it in words. but they're attracted to what you carry, to what you say, because of the context of love.
Because there's no Jew, no Greek,
No Gentile.
no Gentile before the Lord.
That's right.
He loves everyone.
Everyone.
Wow, what a powerful gospel we have to unite the whole
Yes.
world.
Yeah.
We thank
Hallelujah.
God for what you're doing. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you, Dr.
Pastor
Paul. God bless
Khoury.
you.
Thank you so much for this great message of love which unites everyone. And that's the mission we have today. And that's what is happening in Israel and in Palestine, uniting everyone with love, which was shown on the cross by the Lord.